And in exactly the same way, we know independently of our discovery of the initial conditions of the universe what conditions are requisite in order for intelligent life to exist. So this isn't a matter of establishing the pattern after we know it. We know the requisite conditions for life independently of our knowledge of the Big Bang. It's just when we come to the Big Bang, voila, there we find those conditions met despite the enormous improbability. So I think that a far better explanation than chance is that this is the result of design. What about the moral argument? I argue that if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Now, I really think that Dr. De Sousa agrees with that, but he wants to say, well, they're objective in the sense that this is really the way people would act. It's relative to human beings. But the point is that these values are the spin-offs of socio-biological evolution. And if you rewound the theory of, or the film of evolution and let it run again, very different creatures might have evolved with a very different set of values. And it would be purely arbitrary for us to say, well, our values are right and yours are wrong. These are just ingrained into us by sociobiological evolution. They have no objective validity. Steven Pinker of Harvard University wrote in January of last year the following: the scientific outlook has taught us that some parts of our subjective experience are products of our biological makeup and have no objective counterpart in the world. The tastiness of fruit, the scariness of heights, the prettiness of flowers are features of our common nervous system. And if our species had evolved in a different ecosystem, or if we were missing a few genes, our reactions could go the other way. Now, if the distinction between right and wrong is also a product of brain wiring, why should we believe it is any more real? And if it is just a collective hallucination, how could we argue that evils like genocide and slavery are wrong for everyone rather than just distasteful for us? In fact, we couldn't argue that way because it would just be subjective. Richard Taylor is an eminent ethicist. This is what he writes. He says, the infanticide practiced by the Greeks of antiquity did not violate their customs. If we say it was nevertheless wrong, we are only saying it was forbidden by our ethical and legal rules. And the abominations practiced by the Nazis are forbidden by our rules and not obviously by theirs. So it seems to me that in the absence of God, there's simply no basis for objective right and wrong, objective moral values. But that contradicts what we apprehend in our moral experience. If you agree with me that what the Nazis did was wrong, that child molestation is really wrong, then you should agree with me, I think, that God exists. Fourth, the resurrection of Jesus. We didn't really talk about this in tonight's debate. The empty tomb, the appearances of Jesus after his death, the very origin of Christianity are all firmly established facts by historians today. I know of no better explanation than the one that the original eyewitnesses gave, that God raised Jesus from the dead. And that entails that God exists. Finally, personal experience. Again, we haven't talked about this. I think that on the basis of my personal experience, I'm justified in believing in God. Unless you can give me some reason to think I'm delusional, unless you can give me, say, some good argument for atheism, why am I not justified in believing in God on the basis of my personal experience of God? I wasn't raised in a Christian home or a church-going family. I became a Christian late in high school when I began to read the New Testament and experienced a kind of spiritual inner rebirth in which God became a living reality in my life. This is a reality that I've walked with now for over 35 years. And I think it's a reality that you too can find if you'll seek him with an open heart and an open mind. And so that's what I encourage you to do, to seek for God, to ask him if he's real, to ask him to meet with you. And I believe that it can change your life in the same way that it changed mine. Thank you.
I haven't proved that God doesn't exist. Nor can you prove that the great spaghetti in the sky doesn't exist. Nor can you prove that there isn't a lump of green cheese on the other side of Saturn. what we need to do when we think about what to believe is to think about what is likely and to think about what is reasonable. Religions of all kinds have believed in all kinds of different sorts of gods. And each one has given rise to deep experiences, often mystical experiences, certainly experiences of conviction, which are quite similar to the ones that Dr. Craig describes, quite similar to one another, except insofar as each one proves the existence of a completely different, or at least a largely different God, if you confine yourself to the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. It's largely different, but not completely different, because after all, they're all as well people of the book, as we say. Okay? So I think that the burden of proof here is indeed on the person who wants to show that there is a God, and that that God is not just the unknown cause of the universe. Because before the unknown cause of the universe, I can only repeat this here, we can only stand in ignorant wonder. What I have against the theist is that the theist thinks that by saying, ah, it was God, this mystery, which is a real mystery, as many things used to be, which are now no longer mysteries, is a mystery that, in effect, the theist denies. Because the theist is not capable of saying, yes, I have no idea what has started. The theist thinks that by saying, oh, so it must have been God, that we've got an explanation. Now, I want to address the issue of the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy actually is not a fallacy. If you think about all the things that you know by observation, the issue of whether you are now looking at your hand, or whether you are merely dreaming that you are looking at your hand, or hallucinating that you are looking at your hand, that issue, according to, I think, now practically standard views among epistemologists, is settled not by what good reasons you have, but entirely by the question of whether your belief is caused by the presence of your hand. Consequently, if it can be shown that your belief is caused by things, factors, that have nothing to do with the presence of your hand in front of your face, then you are not actually perceiving your hand, even if your hand happens to be in front of your face, but is blocked by a hologram that looks exactly like it, and which is the real cause of your belief. So far from being a fallacy, the genetic approach to truth is actually the standard epistemological approach. And if the origin of a particular belief can be entirely accounted for without positing the truth of the thing you believe in, then I want to say, not that you've proved that it's not there, it might well be there, but that you have not established that it is there. So the burden of proof in this argument is actually an interesting thing to think about, because when you're among believers, it's we atheists who have the burden of proof in what you might call the sociological sense. Because everybody else believes in God, and so how can you possibly deny it? And it's so obvious for everybody that they're in contact with God. They can feel it, they know it, they pray, and God responds. Yes. People do. People do these things, and schizophrenics do them alone, and Christians do them in numbers. And basically, Christians believe stuff which, if you're the only one to believe it, you get locked out as a schizophrenic. But if you can get enough people to believe it too, you get a tax deduction. Right? Exactly. Now, so the genetic fallacy is absolutely not a fallacy.